Why the Pentagon leak is so much bigger and scarier. Now, the largest national intelligence leak since Edward Snowden, it just happened. And the Pentagon seems to have been blindsided. And I say seems to have been because apparently they were the last to know. Sort of how Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen just didn't see inflation coming. But while this data breach is bad for many reasons, what's really behind it and what this shift is telling us is much bigger. And it tells us what to expect over the next few years, and it's not good unless we do the work. So in this video, I'm going to break down what we know about this data leak, what some of the key pieces are, and what they said. But then we're going to dive into the much bigger picture. What's behind this? What does this mean? Why does this seem to be increasing? And how this signals the end of the government as we've known them. And it's happening really fast, so let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money, because almost everything you've learned is wrong, but almost all the data that we get that you've learned is wrong. And so I like to look at the world through the lens of politics, finance, and technology to bring some context to what's going on, and that's exactly what this video is. This really signifies something so much bigger and so much broader, and if you want to know how to secure your money and your freedom, it's important that you understand this. Now, I do want to say that I write a free newsletter, and I put down kind of my thoughts for the week and actionable items, what you can learn in just a few minutes. If you'd like to just sign up for that free newsletter, there's a link down below. It's pretty good value, shows what I'm watching, what I'm learning, and takeaways. So check that out down below. But let's just go ahead and jump into this. So we're talking about this Pentagon leak, which you've probably heard about by now. It's been all over the news. But like I said, there's something so much bigger going on. And basically what we have is the Pentagon, the Department of Defense for the United States, the largest military in the history of the world. And basically we saw the U.S. government's, the docs, get posted online. And as I said in the intro, this is the largest national security breach in over a decade, since Edward Snowden released all the information about how the intelligence community is spying on Americans. Now, this data breach, some people speculate maybe it wasn't real, but it is real. It's been verified by the U.S. intelligence, and basically the intelligence community has now come out and said, stop talking about it. So of course I have to make a video talking about it. But basically there's a lot of stuff that's in there. I'll talk about a couple things, but I want to get into the deeper thing about what this means. But we saw that, for example, they say that this really complicates the plans in Ukraine, that it's, potentially going to cause conflicts with other nations. And that's because of what's in there. Now, this information was first shared. There was a file shared with a very small group of people on Discord in January of this year. And then it was shared again with a larger group in early March. But the Pentagon said that the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was only informed about the leaks on April 6th. Why is it they're the last to know? The Department of Defense, they should know about these things. But of course, like I said, now it's all out. It's been over these message boards for months now. All the mainstream media is talking about it, and the White House is now telling journalists that they have, quote, no business reporting on leaked intel. They're urging journalists not to report on this. So let's look at just a couple of things. What's in it isn't as important as what it means, but a few things. We can see there's revealing details about Kyiv's dwindling air defenses against Russia, showing that they're going to be out of defense munitions, I think this month or last month. That's a problem. It revealed spying by the U.S. on its allies, and it's almost certainly exposed American intelligence sources, so that's not good. The allies don't like to be spied on by their allies. It also mapped, there was maps detailing timelines for the training and preparation of 9 Ukrainian brigades ahead of an expected counterattack. So you're not supposed to give timelines of counterattacks. It predicted that without reinforcement, Ukraine's air defenses would be exhausted by May 23rd. We also saw other stuff, like on the other side of the world, like South Korean officials were wary of sending ammunition to the U.S. out of concern that the arms would end up being sent to Ukraine. Seems they didn't want to be involved in that. We saw U.S. officials were exploring how to persuade Israel to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. How could they persuade them? They threw some ideas around, coerce them, like potentially causing disruptions and protests inside the country. It's not good. And we also saw that the U.S. has been spying on Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Now, the bigger thing behind this is we have to understand what the governments, all the governments of the world, what they do, and more importantly, what they need to do. And what they need to do is, or what they want to do is they want to control the power. Now, there was an awesome book written by Rothbard. It's called The Anatomy of the State. It's like a booklet. You can read it in about an hour. I highly recommend that you buy it on Amazon and give it a read. I'll link to it down below if you want to go buy it from Amazon. It's not an affiliate link, but it's like an hour read, and it's highly advised to go read that book. And in the book, he talks about what is the state. The state is not us. The state is its own organism, and the purpose of the state is to continually grow and continually maintain power. And he talks about all the ways that it does that. But if the purpose of the state is to grow and maintain power, they do that by controlling the narrative. That's what you and I think, right? I talk about this all the time. We think what they want us to think based off of what they put on the news. Hey, look, it's a Chinese weather balloon. And now everyone's talking about the weather balloon, right? Whatever we want to think about, or whatever they want us to think about is what we think about. And I think if we look back over the 20th century, it could probably be called the century of spin. We could say that like he who controls the narrative can control the people. As a matter of fact, the book 1984, which you most certainly have read, and if you haven't, you should read that as well. But in that book, 1984, he said, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. You see the circular logic there. Now, obviously, this has been going on since the beginning of time, most likely. But we can really look back just to like World War I. And I've talked about this in other videos before. But before entering World War I, very few Americans knew anything about Germany. Didn't know anything about its people, its history, its aims. Didn't know anything about that. But the U.S. needed to get into the war to help England defeat Germany. Otherwise, J.P. Morgan was going to lose all the money. And so he bought all the mainstream media in the United States. And then propaganda was starting to be used, and the American people started learning all about Germans. And at the time, propaganda was considered it was a good thing when, of course, the good guys were using it. Now, in the late 1920s, Edward Bernays wrote a book about the essential role that propaganda plays in helping shape the attitudes of the body. And he said, quote, "We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. It's they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world." What a quote. Again, that was in 1920s. But you start to understand it's the narrative that the state has to control to maintain power. But the problem is the governments are losing control. They're losing the narrative. As a matter of fact, we see them losing the narrative in a bunch of examples, but specifically in these data leaks. So this was the largest data leak from the Department of Defense, but we've had other big data leaks. As a matter of fact, just recently we saw the Supreme Court data was leaked about the Roe versus Wade case. I mean, this is the highest branch of government in the United States, and their information was leaked. We still haven't found out who leaked that information, of course. We saw June of last year, in California, all the gun owners' information, thousands and thousands of legal gun owners in the state of California, their information just happened to get leaked. And of course, it just happened to get leaked after the state of California said that they would do anything they could to get back to the Supreme Court for relaxing gun rights laws. We saw September of 2022, the IRS just happened to leak 120,000 taxpayers' information. And of course, those 120,000 taxpayers all happened to be nonprofits, and of course, most of those were conservative nonprofits, but it just happened. These leaks just happened, right? Now, if this is how our nation's top secrets are guarded, the Supreme Court, the Department of Defense, if that's how they're guarded, imagine how badly your personal information is protected. Imagine if someone had posted an opinion on the lab origins of the pandemic, how quickly the FBI would be pounding down their door. But of course, no one still knows about this. Now, the paradox of this is that the government has to maintain control of the narrative if they want to control the people and keep power, which of course they do, as is written about in the book, The Anatomy of the State. So the paradox that the government is in is that they need to control the narrative, but the internet is a technology that takes away their ability to control the narrative. They want the people to have, they want us, the people, to have the information, because without the information, we don't have the education, we don't have free speech, we don't talk openly, we don't have creativity. And without that creativity, we don't have progress. We're not inventing new things. We end up like North Korea. And the government doesn't want that. They don't want to be North Korea. But the paradox is, if they do give us the tools to have that open, honest dialogue, to have that creativity, to have that progress, then they constantly lose power. And that's the paradox that they're stuck in. If they give us the power of the internet, then the ruling party will constantly be challenged. The truth will always be found out, and the narrative will be impossible to control. Now, the government nation states came about in power because of technology. I talk about this all the time. Technology is what changes the world. Technology is what shapes the world. It changes the way that we communicate, it changes the way that we organize, and it ultimately changes the way that the government governs. And so, if we kind of trace this back 250 years, was the start of the Industrial Revolution. That was a new technology. It brought us from the farms and the cottage industry into the cities and into the factories. And over the course of about 150 years, the Industrial Revolution continued to centralize. In the early 1900s, Henry Ford created the father of not just the automobile, but the assembly line. And everybody started moving into factories, and everybody was just a cog on a wheel. We worked together on the assembly line. I might have been smarter than you or vice versa, but we were the same, putting the cog on the wheel. And because of this, the factories basically made all of the masses about the same, and with that came central planners. And with the central planners, they came up with management techniques to basically manage the masses in these mass factories where everybody was equal. And they were able to boil everybody down to a cog in the wheel as a data input on a spreadsheet so they could manage the masses through this mass production. In that, or because of that, rose up a government in much the same way that saw what they did, the central planners did in these mass factories, and they built a government to manage the people in the same way. But the problem is that we're no longer in that era. We've left the industrial age, and now we're into the digital information age. And now we have the digital information age, and we're no longer in the big cities. We're no longer in the factories. Now we're living all over the world. We're working remotely over the internet. You're watching this YouTube video from who knows where. And because of that, we're no longer in that era, that paradigm. The technology has changed. The way that we communicate, organize has changed. And the form of government that we have today is no longer compatible with the world that we live in, because we don't live in the industrial age. Now we all, because of the internet, we have varied tastes, we have varied interests. We're all into different things. We're watching different videos. We're listening to different music. When I was a kid, we all listened to pretty much the same music, and we all watched the same movies. When they asked me what I wanted to be a kid when I was in elementary school, I had like 3 or 4 choices. It was like a fireman, a police officer, like a construction worker, or a doctor. And like that was sort of it. Today, there's millions and millions of jobs that you can have. My little brother sells Pokemon cards online and makes a lot of money. And that wasn't on my job choice when I was a kid. There's millions of jobs that we can do. And because of that, the current form of central planning doesn't work anymore. We don't live in that age anymore. However, back to Anatomy of the State, as Murray Rothbard explains, the state's goal, the government's goal, is to maintain power and grow. And so, what do? They're losing the narrative. They can no longer control that anymore. It's incompatible. Their large government is incompatible with the type of world that we live in today. And so the only thing they can do is try to grasp and to hang on as best as they can. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like total control and total surveillance, which means censorship. So you're going to expect to see more and more censorship. You're going to start to see more and more control. Central bank digital currencies, disinformation and malinformation campaigns online that they have to protect us from. And it reminds me of about 500 years ago during the Protestant Reformation. There was another piece of technology that changed the world, and that was called the printing press. And for the first time in history, we were able to mass produce books. And once people were able to get the books, it was the Bible that was printed first, they were able to read that Bible for themselves and said, wait a minute, what the state has been telling us is wrong all along. They've been lying to us. Now we can read this for ourselves. And as they started to talk about this, they were labeled heretics, heresies. It was called heresy, and they were labeled heretics, and it was punishable by death. But it didn't matter. No matter how many of them died, it didn't matter. The information was out there. And that's where we're at today. No matter how many laws, no matter how many rules the government puts in place today, the Patriot Act, like we talked about with Edward Snowden. The Patriot Act went into place after the Twin Towers were taken down in the United States. And it was the day that Americans lost more freedom than any time in history. Of course, we've seen recently through the Twitter files, the FBI has been working with Twitter to suppress information, to highlight information, to take down accounts they don't like. And today, we're facing the most draconian bill we've ever seen in the history of the United States, and it's called the Restrict Act. Now, typically bills, laws, regulations they try to put in place are misleading. Like, for example, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. So in order to reduce inflation, they're going to print $1.7 trillion. Got it. I thought that would be inflationary. So typically, it's a reverse of what they're really trying to do. They're gaslighting you with a bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. However, this bill is called the Restrict Act. I don't know if I've ever seen a bill actually come out and tell you, yes, our goal is to restrict what you can do in a free country. We're trying to take away your freedoms, and that's exactly what they're doing with the Restrict Act. And it's exactly like what the Protestant Reformation did. Now, they're not threatening to kill you, not yet, but they are threatening to put you in prison for 20 years, take away all of your property, and fine you $1 million. But they have no choice because as we move into this digital information age, they have lost control of the narrative. Now, they can still use the FBI and they can still use Twitter to try to censor centrally managed and controlled networks. But today we have open protocol networks. Today we have an open monetary networks that Bitcoin allows us to use. We can now transfer money. We can make payments. We can settle payments peer-to-peer without any central entity and without any ability for the government to censor or control those. Today, we have new platforms and protocols for communication like Zion, I've talked about many times, that allows us to own our own digital ID. It's hashed in the Bitcoin blockchain. It can't be censored. We have Nostr, which is an open communication platform that we can build our own communication clients on. And so, yes, maybe they can use the FBI to squeeze Twitter, unless a billionaire like Elon Musk buys them out and takes it away. But with these open communication and monetary protocols that are out now, Bitcoin, Zion, Nostr, they have lost their ability. And sure, just like the Protestant Reformation, they'll say, yes, we'll put you in prison for 20 years, but it's not going to stop it. It's also just the United States. There's the big world out there. And so this is the battle. This is our time, and this is what we're watching. Now, one of the ways that we can really drive change is by people like you, entrepreneurs, stepping up. Entrepreneurs have been asleep at the wheel for way too long, and we need you to step up and create these businesses. We need to disrupt all legacy institutions, disrupt finance, disrupt media, disrupt healthcare, disrupt education. Parallel structures is what we need to build. And then as consumers, we need to support those businesses. Now, if you have a business idea or an existing business that you think is disrupting one of those legacy institutions, I'd like to find out. Send me a message and let me know what you're doing to disrupt one of those legacy systems. We'll see if we can get you on, bring some attention to what you're doing, tap into some of my investment networks that we have, potentially get you funding, and so much more, because I want to put my effort behind you to help turn the tide. So reach out, send me a message. We'll put a link down below for you to contact us. Let us know what you're doing. We'll highlight it on the show. We'll bring you on for an interview. We'll bring investors if you need money or whatever we can do to help you out. And as consumers, let's all support those businesses. Otherwise, let me know what you think. Do you think that this form of government is compatible with us in the information age? A yes or no? Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up if you like the video. If you don't, give me a thumbs down. At least tell me why in the comments down below. Share this video because we need to continue to spread these ideas. And that's what I got. All right, to your success. I'm out.